Hi everybody, Chris from BattleGoat Studios. I wanted to make a video today to introduce people to what it's like to do some modding for Supreme Ruler 2030. The Supreme Ruler series has had some great mods over the years, and we really appreciate everything the community has contributed, but our game is rather complex, and that translates into some complex files to work with. I'm hoping to structure these videos, because I plan to make more than one of them, in such a way that you don't have to watch them in a certain order. But this video, I think I'm going to start by talking about how you get to the files, talk a little bit about what are the different files that exist for the game, and showing the resource of the Supreme Wiki, where you can get more information on what does each of the files do. So I've shared my screen here, and for anybody totally unfamiliar with it, in Steam, you can right-click on any of the games you own, go to Properties, and choose to see the installed files. And there's a button there that when you push this to browse, popped up on my second screen, it will show you exactly all the files that have been installed by the game. So this is everything that the game comes with. In the main folder, you have the executable. You also have a map editor. I'll probably have to do that in another video. And you have a number of different folders, and I want to sort of talk about some of the purpose on these. A few of them should be fairly obvious. Graphics is going to have your 2D and your 3D stuff. Sound is going to be music and sound effects. Cache files. These are going to be important for anybody who changes some of the base data that the game starts with. Because the game brings a lot of files together, we've created a system to try and make the game launch faster, that it has pre-baked, is what we call it, into a cache, the files that are involved in making it. And this folder simply stores the different caches that come with the game. Now, I have installed both Supreme Ruler 2030 and the Great War DLC, so I have a few extras if you only have the base game. Another folder to discuss, I'll mention HAPS. This is the file structure for all the user interface. We haven't really published any instructions on how to mod the UI. Some of the players have figured it out. I don't know that I'll get around to trying to do any instructions on those. There's a number of other folders that have very common files in them, but they serve slightly different purposes. They are the tutorials folder, the scenario folder, the sandbox folder, and the campaign folder. Each of these folders has the base file and all subfiles for being able to run the different maps that you play in the game. In some ways, they're separated by folder to help us in the design of how we give things, and they're separated by purpose. Obviously, tutorials are just tutorials. When modding, we suggest users work in the scenario folder. If you go into the game, actually I might as well launch the game for just a moment and have that available to Alt-Tab into. So if I go into Sandbox and I scroll down to Scenarios, the four names shown here, well, that matches directly to the four file names that are shown here. So the .scenario file is the file that the game looks for to run a map. If you're wanting to make a entirely new map, the fastest way to do something like that is to come to the .scenario folder, take one of these .scenario files, or a .scenario file from another folder would also work, and you can just duplicate it. So Battle of Russia, copy this, paste, and I'm going to rename that Christian New Map. And as soon as I've created that file, going back into the game, it immediately appears in the list. Now, it is right now exactly the same. I guess it's already looking for some file name changes. But that didn't change much. If I ran this, I'm going to be playing Battle of Russia, because all I've done is duplicate the starter file that gets you where you want to go. One of the things that we try and do to help players with modding is the majority of our files are stored in plain text. So these .scenario files, when I open them up, they have things stored in plain text. Now, knowing how to modify the different files that come with the game, well, that usually requires an external resource. And I have the website open on my second monitor. We commonly refer to it as the Supreme Wiki. We've used the website Fandom, allows any organization, any group, to create a wiki-style set of documentation. And so this website has stuff about the game and stuff about modding, and it'll talk about various different data files that can be modded for the game. So if you're modifying one of the files, it's a good idea to come here and look at the instructions that are provided. It'll tell you about data formats, syntax that should be used. Sometimes the header for a value won't be really clear what it does. Here you can find some clarification on what they do. So the .scenario file gets things started. And one of the reasons that I saw an immediate change was Battle of Russia. The .scenario file, which is here, well, it has a matching folder. These folders will contain the additional files that are needed. If we look at this one as an example, it has localize is going to be all the text that gets translated for the different languages. It has some event files, some stuff about regions, startup, which regions are included in the map. So a scenario is going to have its first .scenario file. And in that file, let me open Battle of Russia again, it's going to specify specific locations. Now, there are some expectations of where it's going to be. Let's see if I can find an example. So this Battle of Russia regions.csv, there's a comment here that's saying it's in scenario because it is actually, this was the file, right? Yeah. So there's the file. So if players are wanting to start creating stuff, this is a good way of creating a copy so you can edit your copy and still have all your original files to work from. Once you get used to copying the .scenario, then players will often get down to the individual files that they may want to edit. Let me back up a bit and go to the top of the stack again. Looking again at the files that come with the game, the folders in which they're contained. So I've briefly talked about sandbox scenario, campaign, tutorial, sounds is sounds. In the miscellaneous folder, there is actually a Visio file and a PNG file, which is a full visualization of our tech tree, which is quite large. The PNG is tricky to navigate, but if you wanted to see the tech tree, there's a copy of it here. Maps contains a number of the base files that are used to create all of the maps. Whatever .scenario file, whatever folder it's in, a lot of them will use files in here. Some of these will include .cvp, indicates the stats for individual countries. MAPX and OOF, those two files together are what's generated by the map editor. They have the terrain, the borders, the facilities on the map, the ownership, the loyalty, battle zones, theaters are all defined in those two files, and they work together. The .region incl, for any scenario file, the region incl will tell it exactly which regions are to be used. Theaters defines theaters. And then even deeper, the folder ORBATs. That's a military term. It stands for Order of Battle. For anybody who's not military, really it just means inventory. The ORBAT of Canada is a list of all the tanks, planes, boats, artillery, everything that we've got as military. And in those folders, there's a separate file for pretty much every country, even for the different eras as we publish those different things. The data folder has very specific data files. WM data is economic baselines, sets sort of the economic conditions for a map. I don't remember default.name again. Specifics of these can be looked up on the wiki. News items. This is all the different alert messages, objectives, help messages in the game. This defines them. The text they actually fill with is in a separate folder where things get translated. PPLX, all the different people, leaders. PPRF preferences, this sets base map preferences. And PRF, yeah, there's certain profile files that don't apply as much in the SR series. The Galactic Ruler series, where you have different kinds of planets, those definition files are more important. TERX is how the terrain works, what movement penalties are applied. TTRX is the tech tree, all the different technologies. Again, the names and descriptions are separated into another file so that they get translated. Default.unit, everything military equipment, and interestingly, the facilities. The facilities in our game are actually treated as units that don't move. That's probably the majority of the stuff in the data. And then there's a backup folder that when map editing, backups are created when you take certain actions. Localize is about doing translations. INI, these are some structure files that are used by the game to set up basic functions. Common is called that because it's used by a number of different folders. The different .scenario files. Sometimes we had one file that applied to different maps, and so it became necessary to create one folder so that we didn't have to have 4 copies of the same file. We could point to a specific folder and see a specific thing, such as the NATO setup to get all those regions allied. We have multiple maps that use that. Yeah, I think that's the main structure of the files. I'll do a little bit more in this video talking about how you start editing these, and I probably will break for this and pick up in another video. So if you know where to find your files, which, as mentioned, Steam is great for showing you where the different files are. The other thing you may want to have installed, and to get this, you actually need to change, where's my settings again? I think it's because I've done a search here. You have to make sure you're showing your tools. There are games and tools filtered separately in your Steam library. Within the tools, there's a Supreme Ruler 2030 content editor. When I open this, it has 3 parts. One of them, I'll start with the one in the middle, the workshop uploader. This is if you've created files, so this will be a discussion in a later video. Once you've created the files and you're ready to share them, the workshop uploader will allow you to share the files into the Steam Workshop. And then other users can see it, install it easily, leave feedback, and it's a good way of sharing your files around. Scenario Creator is a tool to try and help with those .scenario files to create an original, entirely from scratch scenario. I'll admit that while we have the tool, even we ourselves have a tendency to hand edit some of those .scenario files because we know exactly the setup that we want to create. The one that I think will be most useful to most players is the Asset Manager. When I click on this, it'll open a very blank slate, and this is a file that can import and export a lot of the different data files. And depending on which one you import, it's going to know exactly the layout to use. And to be able to use your Asset Manager, one of the first things you'll need to do is go to the settings and tell it where to find all of your stuff. So this is also why I'd shown the Steam library. Now that I know where my files are on my computer, I can copy this folder. And in my settings, I'm going to set that, by clicking it, it opened this browser window. And I'm going to say this is where it will find all my game files. Select that folder. So now it knows where to import and export from. There's a mesh viewer tool I'll discuss in another video. Some of these other settings, it's really just getting that first file location set. Once you have this, I can choose to do an import. And because I set up the folder, it knows where my files are. And maybe I want to go into maps, data, and look at the tech tree. Now it'll ask me, is this tech tree for next gen, for Supreme Ruler 2030, or there is the possibility to bring in a Supreme Ruler Ultimate tech tree, and it will understand how to reformat the columns. We have kept a very similar data structure from Supreme Ruler Ultimate, but a few new data columns were added. So the goal is that we want players to be able to import SRU mods they've made and re-export them easily in the 2030 format. But this time, this is a next-gen tech tree. I'll say OK. And there's all the data for the tech tree. As you can see, over 1,000 entries, very long tech tree. This SR6 tech level shows us that starts at 1901, and the tech tree goes all the way up to, so this would be plus 19, so this would be 2100. So about 200 years worth of technology for players to explore in the game, and here it can all be edited. So I'm going to stop here for part 1 of how to do some modding. Be sure and check out some of the other videos as I get them posted. But it'd also be helpful if you leave some feedback on this video for what are you most interested to see me play with in terms of the tool. I think the next one I'm going to do is specifically the equipment file because a user had already been asking about that. But I figure that over time there's lots of different videos we can make for this. Hopefully between development we find time to keep making videos. So thanks for watching. Hope this proved useful, and I will make some more videos.